Started on the webinar. So the first thing that we're going to go over is the process of an Izir. So there's some things that we do internally for the process of the Izir. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get the case in the laboratory and you're going to scan it. The second process is going to be the verification bar. We mill a verification bar here at CAP for a few different reasons. Mostly because we want to test the fit of the scan. So it's really a bummer when you spend hours on a full arch restoration and then you realize that maybe the scanner left a skin, like didn't align the scan body, or something was wrong with the implant library selected. So that's why we do the bar. It's a PMMA and takes about 2 hours to mill, and it's just a quick thing. You can make a copy of your design and just do the bar design. So after we do that and we check the fit, we're going to go to the design mill, the CAD verification bridge. So we mill the CAD verification bridge out of PMMA, and basically this is the bridge in the final design for the try-in. So it's easier to make adjustments to the CAD verification bridge than to go straight to zirconia. Also, you get approval from the patient that that's something that they accept as far as aesthetics. So that's kind of the process. Some people skip this process. I wouldn't recommend doing that, only because it can be quite costly to mill the zirconia and then realize that you have a fit issue with the patient, or they are not happy with the results. So after we do the try-in, it will come back. So and then the next item you'll need is your scan bodies. So we sell the NT trading scan bodies that you would use for your restoration. Basically, every implant type has a scan body, and you're going to need to use them so you can find the location of your abutment. And then the last thing you're going to need is a 5-axis mill. So here at CAP we use our roll-and mill, and that seems to work out good for us. So then the next thing you're going to need is all the implant parts. So these are the implants that are supported in our library. So you can see that we have several different types that that are typically the most popular ones that people choose. We use the 2-connect system here. So basically these are the parts that you'll have to additionally buy for each implant site. And then also, oops, sorry, I'm going to go back one second. Oh, no, I'm not clicking the right one. Okay, sorry. And then these are the additional parts that can be added if you have a situation where your abutments are more than a 30-degree divergence, or also if you have a screw axis hole sticking out of the facial that you want to kind of correct. You can buy these implant parts directly from the manufacturer. So we have the Noble multi-abutment and we have the Biomet low profile. All right, so the model requirements. So you always want to make sure that if you don't do your model traditionally with the plastic articulators, that if you're using an Artex or any kind of base, you're going to want to make sure you pin your model. Reason being is the height of your model will not fit in the scanner when it's articulated. So the other option you can do is you can get these plates that are the articulator transfer plates. So you can calibrate these to your scanner, and they work pretty well if you use one type of articulator. Right. So the next and last requirement is make sure your wax-up guide fits to your working model. So this is important because if you have two separate models, it's really hard to get them to align to one another. So if you have a tri-indenture or something like that that you can use, it really helps to be able to position that in the right way. And that's really important because you're going to want to know exactly how long to make the teeth, and if you don't have this positioned in the right place, it can cause all kinds of issues. So, all right, so let's just get to the design now. All right, so we're going to do a simple Izir design. If I only have an hour, so if I did a full arch, we'd be here for probably 3. So what we're going to do is just basically, after you've scanned your case, set it up, everything's all set, you're going to come to the annotation parts, the first part of your design. So you have your insertion direction. Oh, actually, I already marked it for me. Let me just clear it. So first thing that comes up is you're going to have the dots marking like a regular abutment case. So you want to click it kind of near the blinking dot in the implant sites that you need. So once you're done that, you have all this annotated, you're going to go to the next part. So here's the implant direction. So typically what happens with this one is we have the implant direction, so that's kind of showing you exactly where your implants are coming in the direction, and then you have an insertion direction. So changing the insertion direction is only going to change the direction of the way your units come in. So if I change the direction of the bridge, it's not going to change the implant direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it so that my bridge comes in at more of an ideal placement. So I'm going to go to next. And then this is the smile composer part. So basically it gives you an initial proposal. Sometimes it's fantastic and other times it looks a little small depending on the library you use. So there's a couple different ways to kind of attack the tiny teeth. You can move them globally with this multi-teeth tools. So you can move them all at once by hitting the control key on your keyboard. So I'm just sizing them right now. So I'm just going to kind of move them into place. And there we go. So you basically want to get them into a general position on your screen. Right. So don't worry too much about the cervical part because we're going to be covering all of that with Gingiva. So the best thing to do is kind of look where your cervical height is. You can also turn on your study model over here so you kind of know exactly how long your teeth need to be. So usually I'll leave it like a little translucent, and then I'll just move one tooth at a time. And typically I start with my centrals first, and then I sort of work my way to my laterals and so on. Just it's good to have a certain tactic that you use to design your cases. I found that that works pretty good. So I'm just going to turn this on just a little more so I can see. Right. So I'm trying to use the same tool because it's just a little more efficient this way. That way you're not kind of going back and forth, back and forth. So I'm just going to move this. So I'm pretty happy with that placement. I'm going to come over to the other lateral. All right. So You can also use these additional tools that you have over here. Usually I'll just use my morphing tool for smaller movements, kind of, bringing out my incisal embrasures a little bit, or kind of moving some of my planes here and making sure my incisal edges match up. And I'll also use it to move my marginal ridges. Just come over here, make it a little smaller, bring this up a little. So another trick that I kind of do when I design Izers is where I don't have a lip line, kind of like if I was designing this with, traditionally I would kind of put my finger over it. You can also kind of use the end of your screen to kind of see exactly the height of your teeth, because sometimes the gingival area is a little distracting. So I can kind of see these are a little short if I'm matching the incisal edges of my cuspids, so I can come in here and I can just lengthen them a little bit. I also feel like maybe it's a little canted, so I can just use my tool to do that. Same thing with this one. So now I can really see, exactly where my incisal edges are. So that's just a tip that someone showed me a long time ago that really helps. So, all right. So once you kind of have morphed them into place a little bit here, if you want to make any kind of smaller adjustments, you can do that. The next tool I'm going to use is the Sculpt tool. So sometimes, especially with the John Kim Anatomy Library, these depressions are a little bit too much. So usually I'll go right to the Smooth tool and kind of use that to just clean up my contours a little bit. And I also kind of will come in here and just smoothen my line angles a little bit. So I'm not changing my position of my teeth very much, I'm just kind of cleaning up the edges. So you can kind of see it. It just gives it a more natural look. You can also use the Smooth tool for those incisal embrasures too. So I also like using the Add tool because you can just add slightly to your incisal edges. And kind of come over here and do the same thing. Just kind of make a small change. So what I normally say in my trainings is just that the tools are kind of set up the way, bigger movements, smaller movements, and then more defined movements. So when you're dealing with an Izir, you may think, well, I don't have to do a lot of work to this part. Well, the truth is that if you spend a good amount of time making your crowns look good in this part, it'll really help when you do the gingival part, and everything will kind of just be more uniform. So instead of stretching these all the way to the abutment site, keeping all of this intact is really going to help you when you get to the next stage, which you'll see. It's with any other screw rotating crown in 3Shape, usually you want to try to get it as close as you can to the interface, but it's actually a little bit opposite when you're doing an Izir bridge. Usually you have a lot more vertical space. With this particular case, it's pretty ideal, so there isn't a lot of bone loss here, but usually, typically, you're going to do quite a big space here, but for this one we're not. But it's still the same kind of rule that you want to leave all of your cervicals the same length as the rest of them. So with that being said, these are a little short. compared to the cuspids, so I can just go back and I can add to them a little bit. So I'm happy with that. So another thing too that people forget about is the lingual. So you know, the patient doesn't see it, but they can feel it. So it's really important to kind of make sure that you have good, you know, embrasures, and sometimes the lingual anatomy customers don't really like, or you know, the doctor doesn't like. So it's all preference. What I usually do is I'll come in here and kind of just use my smooth tool again, just to kind of give it that. You know, when I do my gingiva, I'll have a nice transition up here. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'm actually just going to soften the anatomy a little bit. And then the other thing you can do is if you're looking at your pre-prep, so you can kind of see I've adjusted the length of these a little bit more ideal from the provisional, but what I can also do is I can come in here with the negative tool and I can kind of just get rid of some of the incisal edge. So that way it has more of a matching incisal edge to what the patient previously had. So you can see it makes a pretty big difference. If I take this off, you can see now I have like a nice sharp incisal edge. So I'm just going to do the same thing. And just come in here with my smooth tool. Kind of wipe that out a little bit. And then I can just come in with my smooth tool and just kind of smooth that all together. So it gives you a really nice thin incisal edge if that's what you're looking for. The other thing that you can use is you can also go back with your add tool and kind of fix those areas a little bit. So you want to try to avoid that, obviously going back and forth, but you know, it's easy to kind of go back and forth and fix those little things. So that's why I kind of say with the wax knife, you don't want to do too much to your crowns, because then you're going to start getting into the situation where you're changing the library. So whatever library you choose, you know, all the anatomy is kind of there for you already. So doing this is, you know, these are just the fine adjustments of what the patient had. So a question that we get a lot when we're doing these types of cases is matching the pre-op. So most of the time, you know, the doctor would like you to improve the aesthetics. You're dealing with more of like a denture type setup, so it's not very natural. So if your doctor specifically requests that you use their pre-op, the wax, the pre-prep option is there for the abutments. It doesn't work very well if you use this tool, which is over here, which is the morph to pre-prep. So I'm just going to show you really quick what that does to your crown. I find sometimes you have to do more work to your crown if you use that than if you don't. You can also run into some issues later on after you do your emergence profile and that connecting. So just going to show you on one unit kind of what that would do. So I'm going to click on the morph to pre-prep and just hit the prep that I want to have copied. So it does give you a general shape, but it gives you some other things to deal with too. You know, you have these gouges coming out because the scan didn't capture quite there. You also have a lot of issues with your line angles. So basically what the software does is it looks for the pre-prep scan and will just put it in place wherever it is. It doesn't smooth it out for you. So I find it's easier just to have the initial shape, and then do those smoothing with the wax knife tools. So that's just something that's a preference for me. If you find that having the morph to pre-prep function work for you, then you can go ahead and do that. That's fine. But those are kind of the tricks that I would say. Just it's much easier to get the results that you need by just working with the library you have. All right, so let's see. All right, so I'm pretty good with my initial design. So if you notice up here, we have the anatomy pre-design, and then now we're going to go to the abutment part of the Izir. So another thing that we realized after many attempts at trying to get these abutments to connect was that traditionally with these kind of implants, you're going to want to put your emergence profile the same level as your tissue. But when it comes to a screw routine bridge, an Izir bridge, the less that the computer has to recognize for the final crown to morph to, the better. So what does that mean? So if I have, you know, all of this kind of, say the tissue is up here, it would have to adapt itself to a bowl shape, basically. So the less geometries that you have in the bottom of your Izir, I found that it works a lot better. So what we do is we kind of, I'll hit control on my keyboard so you can see all the control points are highlighted, and I'll kind of just move them in and bring them down. So let me just undo that really quick so I can kind of show you from the beginning. So again, hit the control key, and then you're going to move in and just bring them down. So what I usually do is, you know, I'll make it probably about 1 millimeter from the base. You can also, you know, I mean, you can get really low with it, but then you're going to probably run into some errors. So you're going to want to do that with all of your abutment sites. So this one is pretty easy, so we only have 2, but you can kind of see. Once I go to the next one, I'm going to move in a little bit. So again, I'm about 1 millimeter. So I know I'm about 1 millimeter because I have the square box up here. So from the center of the square box to the bottom is 1 millimeter. So you can just quickly see that that's how big the band that you're creating is going to be there. So again, we're going to make more cylindrical shapes. Don't want to try to make any weird geometries at the bottom. So the next part is going to be the sculpt part. So this is where it takes your smile composer design and kind of morphs it to your abutment sites. So let's see, it's just going to take a second to load. Alright, so in the newer software, you have the option for connect to margin line. So in the previous versions, I think it's 2014 and earlier, you would actually have these adapted right away for you automatically by going to Sculpt. Now you have the option to connect to margin line like you do with your other crowns. So if that looks a little different to you and you're using an older version, that's kind of why it might look a little different. So basically, if this was a larger case and we had more vertical space here, you would see that the crowns would be way up here and then these sites would be way down here. So what I normally do is I'll go to each abutment site and I'll connect to margin line one at a time. Sometimes if you do too much, it kind of overloads the system, especially if you have an older computer. So it's better to kind of just kind of do one at a time, make sure that they fit. So what's happening here is it's taking my initial proposal and it's adapting it right to the margin. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. Just hit play, and you'll see that it's actually adapted right to my margin pretty well. So something to note here, just so people know, if you have a really deep socket for your gingiva, it's really recommended for the doctor to remove some tissue. We run into that a lot in the milling center where the analogs are really, really deep in the patient's mouth. So you can only make this so thin. Once you get all the parts inside of there and the minimum thickness for your zirconia, that can really be an issue there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my minimum thickness and also my collision line so I can kind of see what's going on here. Alright, so the first thing you see is I'm coming pretty heavy on my contacts here. So I'm going to fix that right away. So sometimes I find it easier just to kind of manually sculpt these a little bit. Instead of going right for the auto tool, it kind of really helps to just work with it a little bit beforehand. Mostly because sometimes it actually won't do a very good job with your contact that way if there's too much coming through. So I'll kind of just go around each implant site and kind of clean that up a little bit. So the other thing is that I have the top of my implant coming through. So you always want to cover that. The software actually won't let you move forward unless you do. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover that a little bit. And I'm going to make sure that I have a good minimum thickness. So just make sure that your bar over here is set to your minimum thickness. So here at CAP we usually do 0.6. So just scroll over and come over here. And I want to make sure that all of these areas are thick enough, because with mill chips we'll typically see them on weakened areas around the abutment sites. So the other thing is you can see I'm adding, nothing's happening. So what you can do is you can hit Sculpt on Protected Surfaces, and then it allows you to adapt your crown to the base. And gives you a much better transition. So now I can add to this, no problem, and make sure that I have enough thickness here. Really awesome that you can do that now. So I'm just going to move over here, and I'm going to manually strengthen all those areas. Instead of using my auto tools, I tend to kind of just, go around the areas first and then, double check it with the auto tool. So when you're dealing with a large bridge, this step can really take you a long time to go over each individual implant site, but it makes a big difference, and it's really important when you're doing your Izers. So obviously your implant hole will always be red. So I'm just going to kind of fill around there, and then again I'm going to go around all of the implant sites near the base. So that's the area of concern with chipping. So I want to make sure I have a nice thick margin around that area. And then I'll kind of just smooth, give myself a little bit more for embrasure space. You can also kind of come in here and just redefine your cervical area. Now that it's connected, it's kind of taken my design out. So I use the wax knife tool for a lot of different things. And if you notice, like, I'm not changing this very often. I think it's more efficient to kind of have it at one level, so I trust what it's moving, and I don't have to move back and forth with my adjustments. So you can kind of see this is a little bit bulky compared to that one, so I'll just use my negative tool and come in and kind of change that a little bit. And then I'll go back to my smooth and kind of smooth what I just did. So these type of tools really work. well for you. If you are more comfortable using the morphing tool, you can also use that. But I just find this is the tool I'm comfortable with, so it's the one I use. So then over here, I'm going to come this part. So now it's the same situation that I had over here. I'm just going to come over here and manually remove that. And kind of just sculpt it this way. Alright, so now at this point, once I have all of my abutments cleaned up a little bit, I'm going to come over here and turn my model back on and just kind of survey it, see what it looks like, how it looks to my study model. I've made a little bit of changes to the study model, so if I take my teeth off, you can kind of see that, you know, to me these look pretty short, so you know, adding to them definitely makes a difference in the patient's overall appearance, so that's kind of what we're looking for. But now I can kind of see other things that are bothering me, so I'll just come in with my smooth tool. And the additional thing that you can kind of look at is the shapes. These are really rounded, and my crowns are really too square still, so I'll just come in over here and do the same thing. So now I'm starting to get the appropriate shape, and I'm happy with that. The other thing that's good to check at this point is, alright, how do I move this thing? Let me see real quick. Okay, so you're going to want to take your implant parts out at this stage. This is a really important part before you go to the gingiva step. I have made the mistake of leaving material inside these cones. It's really hard once this is sintered, and you know, or even pre-sintering, if you try to grind out that material, it's really tough. So you want to make sure you have a nice intimate fit with your cones. So just make sure, especially, you know, cases where you have the abutment site over here and then you kind of drag your abutment over here and then you have a ponic here. Just make sure that inside of your abutments are always clear of any material. So basically you can just come in here and you can remove it. So it's much easier to do it now than to move forward and have that situation happen. So always check, because that's a big thing. Alright, so just some of the other tools you can use. So 3Shape's kind of, you know, put out the aligned pre-preparation, which is really cool. I like to use the selection. So if you or actually, let me see, the move part. The selection, you can select certain points and then align it like you can similarly in the scan. But I like to move it manually so that I can have a little bit of control over where it's going. So I'm going to remove my posing here a little bit. And then you can actually move your scan so to exactly where you need it. So sometimes you don't always get the best alignment with the scan. So this is a really cool way to kind of adjust that without having to, you know, kind of guess where things should be. So you can also use these arrows that kind of move it a little bit, which will help you. So I'm happy with that. That looks pretty good. So then what you do, just exit out, and now you have your pre-prep aligned to where you want it. So all right, so once you're kind of done with that, we'll move on to the gingival part. Let's put my teeth back here so you can see. Ah, that's going to bother me. Hold on. All right, that's good. So let's go to the next part. All right, so this is the thing. So with any full contour bridges in 3Shape, you do not need connectors. So in the order form, if the scanner set it up as, you know, with the connectors, you can just come in here and you can go right here and click None. So I'm going to click on each connector and do that. As long as the units are touching, you don't have to worry about that. So just come in here and do that. All right. I'm going to hit Next. So it's always going to need, you know, violate the minimum thickness because of the implant sites. We can always adjust that in the next step. So instead of hitting yes, sometimes if you hit yes, you'll get these big globs where it thinks it's thin. So I prefer to hit no and not have the computer do anything manually for me. So I'm just going to do that. All right, so this is the gingiva part. So the gingiva part has come a long way in 3Shape, and it actually works really well now. They have sorted out some of the bugs with it, and it's a lifesaver for anyone that's been designing a long time. When we didn't have gingiva, that was a nightmare. So now that we have it, it's a very useful tool. So what I'm going to do is, so there's, you know, 3 types of here for outlines. So typically I'll use this one, which is the draw implant opening first. So you can kind of go around each implant site, and usually I use, you know, about a ½ millimeter of space around the implant. And then just like any other implant site, you can kind of you can delete your spline. You can do a fast edit spline if that's easier for you, just similar to a margin line. You can kind of use these different tools. So I'm just going to go around each. So you do this on each implant opening. So the reasoning for this is it's basically telling the software exactly where the tissue, it's sort of like a boundary for the tissue so that it doesn't cause any issues with the fit. So this is pretty important, so I would make sure that you do these for all. Sometimes you'll have a situation where you have your implants are really, really close. It also works really well if you have, you know, 2 implants really close to each other where you can't get these lines. You know, around it you can do one big circle. So meaning, if I just redo this really quick so I can show you, if these were closer, you can also do, you know, a giant kind of peanut looking thing over here. And it'll work for you. So I'm going to delete the spline and go back to the normal implant openings. So just basically go all the way around. You can also add points just like your margin. So it's basically a lot of the same functions as your margin line. So all right, let's go around. And So once you have all of your implant openings all set, you're going to make sure that you, none of them are close or touching, because the lines cannot intersect each other. So next thing is I'm going to outline the gingiva. So usually I'll turn on my study model just so I can kind of see exactly where the gingiva fell for the previous patient. So I'll kind of come over to this and come around here. And then with the lingual, we try to make it as, cleansable as possible. So I'm going to bring it up quite a bit here. And I'm going to get rid of my study model. So I'm going to try to bring this as close as I can, because we definitely don't want to have too much of a ridge lap on the lingual. And the same thing on the facial. Depending on how much space you have, you don't want to do too much of a ridge lap, so then the patient won't be able to clean it. So you really want to come around here and just this. All right. I'm going to extend this a little bit just so it has some more contour to it. Over here. Okay. So once you're happy with that, the next part that you're going to want to make sure that you engage over here is the relief. So we have these set to the maximum for relief. We found that even with the relief, sometimes it's a little tight on the tissue. So basically that's what the relief means. That's the amount of material it's going to remove from the underside. So it's similar to like your cement gap. So we always maximize that, which is 0.35. The software actually won't let you take it out anymore. And then the implant protection distance is the protection distance around your implants. So a good thing to do is to always hit preview and not next, just so you can see kind of exactly where your tissue is before you hit the next one. So I'm just going to fill in this a little bit so I can easily just adjust it in the stage. Now I'm going to hit preview again. All right. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go to Sculpt. So now everything that I move with my tissue, it's not going to allow me to move anything here because I still have, Sculpt on protected surfaces unchecked. So I'm kind of going to come around here, just move this a little. And just remove some material that is kind of drowning my crowns a little bit. So you can also, you also have your morphing tool, which works really well too if you have a large tissue. So I'm also going to come in and add a little bit to all of my gingival embrasures. And so I'm pretty happy with that, because what's going to happen is we're going to end up layering this anyway. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the layering portion. So what you can do is you can set these up as anatomical gingiva in the order form. So basically it gives you an initial proposal, and then you can go ahead and adjust the areas that you need to, and it'll cut back automatically. I find it's just a little bit redundant if I can just manually sculpt it real quick, then rather than doing my whole gingiva and then cutting it back to a certain amount, I can actually just come in here and hand sculpt it a little bit. So that's kind of my technique, but I know some people do use the anatomical gingiva too. So other thing to note with this, so let me just take my model off, you're now able to you know, sculpt on some of the protected areas in your gingiva, which is really cool. Before, this was kind of locked so that you would have no freedom in moving this. So now with the gingiva, you're actually able to move this. So there really aren't any boundaries as far as getting any kind of cleansable items into your gingiva. So it actually works really well. So we've been using that a lot too, just to kind of remove some of the material and make it a little bit more open so that bacteria can't get caught in there. All right, so then the last thing you're going to want to make sure is just take your, let's put your gingiva back on. Make sure that you don't have any pink inside of your cones, so actually come in here, and of course that's not going to let me take it off. So that little bit should be okay, but you want to make sure that there isn't like a large amount coming through. So that's fine. Okay, so the next part we're going to do is when it's all one piece. So I really don't, I do spend a lot of time in my designs that I don't have to do a lot in this step, but it is really good to have it just to do some final things. So like say I didn't really do a good job over here with getting my crowns in contact. I can come over here and do that. You know, I can also make sure that my crown's a minimum thickness of 0.7. I can also, you know, smooth out all of my teeth a little bit using that. The main thing that I do in this step is just kind of make sure that I don't have anything that looks, you know, a little odd. So I'll kind of go around and just move my teeth a little bit that way. Also, like if you see this, something like this, you can move your contacts a little bit just to make them more parallel or perpendicular to the floor. If you notice like one's a little bit bigger, you can actually grab the whole thing and move it. And then also you have the option here as well to sculpt on protected surfaces. So you can come in here and you can do a little bit more relief underneath your tissue. So I'm just going to do that. Make sure I don't have any areas coming through. And then I'll just come in here and kind of relieve this a little bit here. I don't like doing the auto cutbacks on these just because it's a little bit tough to see. You know, it's a little bit tough to keep it intact. So I do some manual stuff. And then over here, I'm just going to kind of smooth it. So any kind of sharp edges, I'm kind of coming along and just smoothing out. I'm also making sure that I have enough material, so looks like I do around these implants, but you can always come in and kind of add a little bit more. But you can kind of see that I'm pressing a lot on the tissue, so I don't want to be overly zealous with those areas. So let me just turn this back on so we can kind of see this. Alright. Alright, so the last part of your Izir bridge is the assembly. So the assembly is a very important part, especially if you want to move your screw axis hole. So with this particular case, we are in the clear with the screw axis holes, but sometimes, you know, the implant surgeon will place your abutments too far out, and then you'll end up with a hole on the facial of, you know, your central or any of your anteriors. Is not good. It's really difficult to work with that. So what you can do is you can come over here to angle screw hole. So what it does is it starts it at 0 for you, and then you can kind of move it, and it'll actually move your screw access hole. So what I do is I like to kind of look and see. So I'm just going to turn this part back on. So this is the titanium base, or the insert. So you can kind of see exactly how much you're moving it. So the software will only let you move it to 15 degrees. But just to note, if you do move it to 15 degrees, you also, you know, need to think about how much you're increasing the diameter of the hole, because unless you have an angled driver that can kind of come in and get to that screw, you're going to have a really tough time retrieving it. So what we like to do is just kind of say we move it to 7.5, and I'm going to hit preview. So you'll notice it hasn't moved this one. So if you look in here, I mean, and this is what people ask all the time, how much should we increase the drill hole radius? So what I do is I'll kind of look, let me make it more obvious so you can really see it. So what I do is I can see how I'm losing sight of this area right here. So I know that my hole is kind of going in that direction quite a bit, and it's kind of leaving this area really, really thin. So what I'll do is I'll increase it. I usually start at 0.1 just to start with, and then I'll hit preview. And it has increased the size of it. So now I can see more of this space is what I need, so I know that my driver is going to fit in there. So there really isn't an exact science to how much you know, of a drill hole radius you have to increase. It's more about how much you're moving, and then, you know, kind of going from there. So I would suggest doing that. Always hit preview, never hit next, just so you can kind of see what's going on. But the other thing when you're increasing the drill hole radius is you'll notice when you do it, it actually increases the holes of all of your abutments. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you're moving your implant back, but you're also increasing the size of your hole, you're kind of running into those kind of issues. So just look out for that, and those are the main things. So you know, those are basically the things of the Izir that we do here. So at this point, I guess we'll open it up to questions. And okay, is 2Connect? All right, so we have a question from Hale Jones. Hello. Is 2Connect NT Trading FDA approved? So right now the FDA regulation is on milled titanium abutments. So basically this does not pertain to screw retained crowns. I do believe that the 2Connect parts are FDA cleared, so we're good with that. But basically the main concern is with the custom milled titanium abutments, which is what we've been kind of working with. All right, so that was a good question. So next question is from Joseph. Can you show us who you enter this case on the order? Oh, how you enter this case on the order form? Sure. Okay, so this is the order form. So this is how you're going to set it up. So you're going to set them up, all of the abutments in the implant types that they are. So basically we're going to choose, this one just happens to be a cap 3i low profile, and then you're going to choose the kit. So you're going to choose the screw retained crown, whatever the system is, and then whatever the kit is. And then you're also going to make sure that you have the right material selected, the manufacturer, and different manufacturing processes that you're going to set up. So I will say you don't have to have them all grouped or ungrouped. I know with different bridges, so what that means is all of your crowns are going to move in one direction, but with the screw routine bridge you don't have to worry about that. So that's kind of how you set it up, and then you'd set your pontics up using the same material, which is very important if you're bridging it, and just make sure you have the same manufacturing processes and make sure that you have the right material selected. And then you're going to want to turn on your gingiva, which is right here. So in my demo I kind of told you that you can have the anatomical gingiva, which is very similar to an anatomical coping. This is more for the denture module, which we didn't cover in this one, but these are the two ones that you're going to want to have selected. So implant type, then you're going to select your pontics, make sure that you have the right material selected, same manufacturer, and then your gingiva you're going to add on to there. So that's kind of how you set that up. All right, let's see. All right, let's get to another one. All right. Miles tool. Okay, so let's go to all right, when setting up the case, can we add gingiva then, or do we have to go back in and modify it in the design stage? So you don't have to add it to it then. You are able to add gingiva to your design after the fact, and it does save your design. It doesn't save your emergence profile for some reason. So you kind of have to go in and do that step, but it does save your design. All right, so do we need all right, here's another question. Do we need to use a special screw and a special driver tip when you angle the screw hole? Does CAP sell any of these special drivers and screws? So with the 2Connect system, you are required to use the driver that is provided for NT trading. We do sell that, the ones you're talking about, the special drivers, I'm not sure on as far as the angle drivers that you're talking about with the inserts that kind of help you with that, but I do know that we sell the driver and the insert for NT trading. All right, so, and if they do, are the screws perfectly compatible? That's something I'm not sure on, and I'd have to get clarification on that one, but I do believe that you can purchase those types of drivers. The driver that fits in the female part, which is the top screw, any traditional driver that you would use for implants is used. It's more the titanium insert that actually goes into the implant model. That is what you need the special driver for, if that makes sense. And we do sell those. Additionally to the torque driver that you need for the dentist to use, you do need to buy a special torque driver for that, and we do sell that one as well. Okay, so all right, we'll go to the next question. Before in 3Shape you had to put in gingiva after you scan. Do you still have to do that? Nope, not in the newer version. We're using 2015. I think we're using .6, maybe, I'm not sure. But we are using probably the most stable version in 2015, and you don't have to do that workaround anymore, which is really great. All right, so then the next question is, what do you do when you get to the message move tooth closer to implant? So when I get the message move tooth closer to implant, usually I find a lot of times that's because of my emergence profile. So when my emergence profile is more uniform, kind of what I showed you guys, I don't typically get that message, but unfortunately when you do get that message, the best thing, and you'll see that a lot with the previous versions of 3Shape, it will do that, and you will have that issue. But with the newer versions, they've kind of moved away from that, so that's good. So basically, if you're in an older version and you're designing, to move the abutment closer to the implant and kind of get your emergence profile a little more uniform, that usually works. Obviously, you don't want to going through it with your crown, but just to get it closer to the emergence profile, that'll help. A lot of times, if you change your design, sometimes if you rescan things, you'll get kind of a choppy edge on your old design. It will remember that. The best thing to do with that is just take your emergence profile and go closer to that. And that usually works for you. All right, do 2 connect caps fit over the Noble 3i multi-fixtures? Yes, they do. The angled abutments that I kind of showed before shows you can buy those additional parts from the manufacturer. So the 3i low profile and the Noble Multi are the 2 systems that you can use the NT trading caps over. So we've actually created a library that will allow you to do that. So that was a good question. All right, so all right, so the next question is, how do you get the gingiva to pink? Is it pre-sintered plus, post-sintered, and stained? So there's a few different methods that we use here. I can touch on them a little bit, but we do have a couple videos, you know, kind of showing this on our CAP Academy website that will really help. Pam Hanneman's done quite a few of them, so I know that those might be really helpful to watch. But we pre-color them in the green state. We'll actually use the gingival stains, and we'll fire them, and then it comes out and it's kind of like a bubble gum color. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to layer it. So the misconception is that you can kind of just multi-shade them in the green state and then they come out and, you know, everything looks natural. But the truth is you do have to use some materials to layer those. And then of course you can do some staining post-center, and you can stain some of it, but most of the color is going to come from your you know, ceramic powders or your composite that you're using. So, okay, next question. If the scan model has some holes on the tissue area, we have to rescan for gingiva option. Yes, that is a big part of you know, getting your initial scan. You can get around with that a little bit by using some of the tools that you're marking for your gingiva. Sometimes going around the hole will help with that. But you want to try to get like a really good surface scan for your you know, your working model, because 3Shape doesn't really, as everybody knows, it doesn't really work well with sharp edges or holes or anything like that. It'll give you a lot of problems. So it's really best to kind of take care of that in your initial scan, or you're going to have to rescan that part, which is sometimes time-consuming. So I would recommend getting a really good scan first, and if you're doing a verification bar, you can also kind of double-check the model as well when you're doing that. So, all right. Okay. All right, so the next question is, why are you unable to use the D700? So all right, so it looks like this. So for the D700, the accuracy is not high enough for those type of cases. For large span bridges, I'm sure it works just fine for, you know, smaller, less complicated, but we definitely recommend more of a D800 for that. All right. So the next question is, in the beginning, the verification bar, you said to make a copy, is is that a copy of the bar prior to the design to verify the accuracy of the bar? Yes. So once you do your initial scan and you set everything up, the best thing to do is to right-click and hit Advanced, and then or make a copy, and you're going to make a copy of the whole case. So it's the same scan that you used for, you're going to ultimately use for your design. So that's how you kind of handle that, and that usually works really well. And then that will test the accuracy of your initial scan because it's the same scan. So, all right, what causes the spikes in the gingiva? Well, I can't really give you a solid answer on that. We usually call them kind of glitches in the software or weird things that happen. I've seen some spikes in the gingiva that you can't get rid of. Sometimes it happens with your crowns too. Most of the time those kind of shapes do not mill out. Sometimes it'll cause a problem, but I haven't seen, sometimes it'll give you a problem with the calculation of your bridges. So, you might not have an issue in design, but when they go to calculate the bridge and, the cam section, that might be a problem for that. But I really don't know what causes it, but it is quite annoying. All right, so let's go to, okay. All right. How do you switch from PMMA to zirconia using the same file? So in your Sum 3D, when you load the file in, that's where you just select that you were doing the PMMA, so that the shrinkage rate would change. The initial scan that you do is the Izir scan. You're going to use the Izir zirconia. So when you use that, when you load that one in, you're going to want to make sure that you choose the zirconia. But when you load the same design into your Sum 3D for the PMMA, you're just going to make sure that you switch them to the PMMA settings in the disk selection. So, right, so, okay, can this be done with stock abutments that are pre-prepped by hand? Okay, so this is something that we have a little bit of an issue with sometimes with the milling center. It can be done. The way that you would go about that would be to make sure that you marked with all of your stock abutments. You want to make sure once you get to the gingiva part that you go around each implant site with the blue circle, and then that way it will kind of you'll make sure you tell the software that that's an opening. If you don't, you're not going to be able to get gingiva to work on there. It is very tough to get it to adapt, but I think it's getting better with every version. So it is a possibility. So, okay. All right, next question. In the Scan It restoration, there used to be a possibility to scan and align your bite registration to the pre-prep model. In Scan It Dental, this feature seems to be missing. This feature was very useful, as you could have scanned the bite with the screw-retained temporary bridge that the patient was wearing, for example. Can it be done with Scan It Dental? Actually not sure on that one. We'll actually probably definitely get a scanner's opinion on that one, because yeah, so we'll definitely send you an email for that one. I'm not sure, to be totally honest with you. I know with the with the pre-prep, they have changed quite a bit with the Scan It Dental is definitely different, so we'll definitely get back to you on that one. What fixture components do you use for the verification bar, and do you need a special library for it? So the verification bar, you're going to use the same parts that you would use for your final Izir. So that's the 2Connect system. You will need to have the 2Connect library. So when you purchase the scan body kit from CAD, You also get the library for free, which is really great. So we would just come in and make sure that you had the library for 2Connect parts, and you're going to use the same components that you would use for the finalizer. Okay, how do you adjust the zirconia after you get the PMMA back from the doctor? So usually the doctor is the person that makes the changes on the PMMA. So typically you'll get it back and the bite will be ground in a little bit, or they'll make marks on the pre-prep for you. So basically what we do is we always make a copy of the case, just because we never want to adjust the original file at all costs, just in case. We make a copy and then we'll rescan in the pre-prep, so that what happens is you have the pre-prep, the new pre-prep, and then you have your design, and then you can adjust your design accordingly. Alright, so the next question. I am using the 2014 version. Sometimes I get the issue when it doesn't switch to another library. Oh, so you're talking about on Smile Composer. That I'm not sure of. I think that might be a 3Shape glitch, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so we'll have to talk to support about that one. How much pressure do you want to apply to the tissue? So normally with the pressure on the tissue, most people don't want any pressure on the tissue. So it's all preference. There isn't really a cut and dry of what the level of pressure to apply to it. Usually, we've noticed that it's better to take it out a little bit and not have any collision lines underneath, because the tissue, it seems to work better for us to have a little bit of space under there. But again, it's all preference. So how do you design set up for a verification jig? So the verification jig, you're going to basically use the same parts and the same, set it up similar with the abutments, but instead of choosing them as screw retained crowns, you're going to actually select the bar, which if you have that module, you can select that, and it will mill out the bar for you. So designing is very easy if you've used the design module, but again, you need to have the actual abutment and bar module to do it. I didn't cover that in this one just because it's a little bit longer than an hour that we have, but I can tell you that it's very easy, very simple. It takes probably about 5 minutes to design, maybe even less, to design a verification bridge. So, all right. So that's it. Well, thank you very much for watching my webinar, and I'm sorry for the technical difficulties that we had with the webinar, and thank you to everybody that kind of stuck around and waited. And all right, so that's about it. So if everyone has any questions, they can always contact me, and also contact your CSM if you're interested in buying any of the products, and that's about it. So thanks.